I am Valerie Abraham. I am a mother and homemaker with a great love for the classics, though I'm usually more of a Virgil fangirl than a Homer fangirl. I'm using Lattimore's translation because that is Wes Callahan's favorite, and he is not an authority to be easily disputed with on the subject of translations, and it is a really good translation. The Iliad, Book 18. So these fought on in the likeness of blazing fire. Meanwhile Antilochus came, a swift-footed messenger, to Achilles, and found him sitting in front of the steep-horned ships, thinking over in his heart of things which had now been accomplished. Disturbed, Achilles spoke to the spirit in his own great heart. Ah me, how is it that once again the flowing-haired Achaeans are driven out of the plain on their ships in fear and confusion? May the gods not accomplish vile sorrows upon the heart and me in the way my mother once made it clear to me, when she told me how while I yet lived, the bravest of all the Myrmidons must leave the light of the sun beneath the hands of the Trojans. Surely then the strong son of Menoetos has perished, unhappy. And yet I told him, once he had beaten the fierce fire off, to come back to the ships, not fight in strength against Hector. Now as he was pondering this in his heart and his spirit, meanwhile the son of stately Nestor was drawing near him, and wept warm tears, and gave Achilles his sorrowful message. Ah me, son of valiant Peleus, you must hear from me the ghastly message of a thing I wish never had happened. Patroclus has fallen, and now they are fighting over his body which is naked. Hector of the shining helm has taken his armor. He spoke, and the black cloud of sorrow closed on Achilles. In both hands he caught up the grimy dust, and poured it over his head and face, and fouled his handsome countenance, and the black ashes were scattered over his immortal tunic. And he himself, mightily in his might, in the dust lay at length, and took and tore at his hair with his hands, and defiled it. And the handmaidens Achilles and Patroclus had taken captive, stricken at heart, cried aloud, and came running out of doors about valiant Achilles, and all of them beat their breasts with their hands, and the limbs went slack in each of them. On the other side Antilochus mourned with him, letting the tears fall, and held the hands of Achilles as he grieved in his proud heart, fearing Achilles might cut his throat with the iron. He cried out terribly, aloud, and the lady his mother heard him, as she sat in the depths of the sea at the side of her aged father, and she cried shrill in turn, and the goddesses gathered about her, all who along the depth of the sea were daughters of Nereids. For Glauce was there, Cimodoce and Thaleia, Nesei and Speo and Thoe, and Oxide Halia. Cimothoe was there, Octaia, Limnorea, Melite and Tiara, Amphithoe and Aguae, Doto and Proto, Dinamene and Pharusa, Dexamene and Amphinome and Calenera, Doris and Panope and glorious Galatia, Nemertes and Apsuedes and Calianassa. Clymene was there, Yanera and Yanassa, Mara and Orithea and lovely-haired Amathea, and the rest who along the depth of the sea were daughters of Nereus. The silvery cave was filled with these, and together all of them beat their breasts, and among them Thetis led out the threnody. Hear me, Nereids, my sisters, so you may all know well all the sorrows that are in my heart, when you hear of them from me. Ah me, my sorrow, the bitterness in this best of childbearing, since I gave birth to a son who was without fault and powerful, conspicuous among heroes, and he shot up like a young tree, and I nurtured him, like a tree grown in the pride of the orchard. I sent him away with the curved ships into the land of Ilion to fight with the Trojans, but I shall never again receive him won home again to his country and into the house of Peleus. Yet while I see him live and he looks on the sunlight, he has sorrows, and though I go to him, I can do nothing to help him. Yet I shall go, to look on my dear son, and to listen to the sorrow that has come to him as he stays back from the fighting. So she spoke and left the cave, and the others together went with her in tears, and about them the wave of the water was broken. Now these, when they came to the generous Troad, followed each other out on the seashore, where close together the ships of the Myrmidons were hauled up about swift Achilles. There, as he sighed heavily, the lady his mother stood by him, and cried out shrill and aloud, and took her son's head in her arms. Then, sorrowing for him, she spoke to him in winged words. "Why then, child, do you lament? What sorrow has come to your heart now? Speak out, do not hide it. These things are brought to accomplishment through Zeus, in the way that you lifted your hands and prayed for, that all the sons of the Achaeans be pinned on their grounded vessels by reason of your loss, and suffer things that are shameful." Then, sighing heavily, Achilles of the swift feet answered her, "My mother, all these things the Olympian brought to accomplishment. But what pleasure is this to me, since my dear companion has perished, Patroclus, whom I loved beyond all other companions, as well as my own life? I have lost him, and Hector, who killed him, has stripped away that gigantic armor, a wonder to look on and splendid, which the gods gave Peleus, a glorious present on that day they drove you to the marriage bed of a mortal. I wish you had gone on living then with the other goddesses of the sea, and that Peleus had married some mortal woman. As it is, there must be on your heart a numberless sorrow for your son's death, since you can never again receive him won home again to his country, since the spirit within does not drive me to go on living and be among men, except on condition that Hector first be beaten down under my spear, lose his life, and pay the price for stripping Patroclus, the son of Menoetius." Then in turn Thetis spoke to him, letting the tears fall. "Then I must lose you soon, my child, by what you are saying, since it is decreed your death must come soon after Hector's." Then deeply disturbed Achilles of the swift feet answered her, "I must die soon then, since I was not to stand by my companion when he was killed. And now, far away from the land of his fathers, he has perished, and lacked my fighting strength to defend him. Now, since I am not going back to the beloved land of my fathers, since I was no light of safety to Patroclus, nor to my other companions, who in their numbers went down before glorious Hector, but sit here beside my ships, a useless weight on the good land, I, who am such as no other of the bronze-armored Achaeans in battle, though there are others also better in counsel, why, I wish that strife would vanish away from among gods and mortals, and gall which makes a man grow angry for all his great mind, that gall of anger that swarms like smoke inside of a man's heart, and becomes a thing sweeter to him by far than the dripping of honey. So it was here that the lord of men Agamemnon angered me. Still, we will let all this be a thing of the past, and for all our sorrow beat down by force the anger deeply within us. Now I shall go to overtake that killer of a dear life, Hector. Then I will accept my own death, at whatever time Zeus wishes to bring it about, and the other immortals. For not even the strength of Heracles fled away from destruction, although he was dearest of all to Lord Zeus, son of Cronos, but his fate beat him under, and the wearisome anger of Hera. So I likewise, if such is the fate which has been wrought for me, shall lie still when I am dead. Now I must win excellent glory, and drive some one of the women of Troy, or some deep-girdled Dardanian women, lifting up to her soft cheeks both hands, to wipe away the close bursts of tears in her lamentation, and learn that I stayed too long out of the fighting. Do not hold me back from the fight, though you love me. You will not persuade me." In turn the goddess Thetis of the silver feet answered him, "Yes, it is true, my child, this is no cowardly action, to beat aside sudden death from your afflicted companions. Yet see now, your splendid armor, glaring and brazen, is held among the Trojans, and Hector of the shining helmet wears it on his own shoulders and glories in it. Yet I think he will not glory for long, since his death stands very close to him. Therefore do not go yet into the grind of the war god, not before with your own eyes you see me come back to you. For I am coming to you at dawn, and as the sun rises, bringing splendid armor to you from the lord Hephaestus." So she spoke, and turned, and went away from her son. And turning now to her sisters of the sea, she spoke to them. "Do you now go back into the wide fold of the water to visit the ancient of the sea and the house of our father, and tell him everything. I am going to tall Olympus and to Hephaestus, the glorious smith, if he might be willing to give me for my son renowned and radiant armor." She spoke, and they plunged back beneath the wave of the water, while she, the goddess Thetis of the silver feet, went onward to Olympus to bring back to her son the glorious armor. So her feet carried her to Olympus. Meanwhile, the Achaeans, within human clamor before the attack of manslaughtering Hector, fled until they were making for their own ships in the Hellespont. Nor could the strong-grieved Achaeans have dragged the body of Patroclus, henchman of Achilles, from under the missiles. For once again the men and the horses came over upon him, and Hector, Priam's son, who fought like a flame in his fury. 3 times from behind glorious Hector caught him by the feet, trying to drag him, and called aloud to the Trojans. 3 times the 2 Iantes, with their battle fury upon them, beat him from the corpse. But he, steady in the confidence of his great strength, kept making, now a rush into the crowd, or again at another time stood fast with his great cry, but gave not a bit of ground backward. And as herdsmen who dwell in the fields are not able to frighten a tawny lion in his great hunger away from a carcass, so the 2 Iantes, marshals of men, were not able to scare Hector, Priam's son, away from the body. And now he would have dragged it away and won glory forever, had not swift wind-footed Iris come running from Olympus with a message for Peleus' son to arm. She came secretly from Zeus and the other gods, since it was Hera who sent her. She came and stood close to him and addressed him in winged words. "Rise up, son of Peleus, most terrifying of all men. Defend Patroclus, for whose sake the terrible fighting stands now in front of the ships. They are destroying each other. The Achaeans fight in defense over the fallen body, while the others, the Trojans, are rushing to drag the corpse off to windy Ilion, and beyond all glorious Hector rages to haul it away, since the anger within him is urgent to cut the head from the soft neck and set it upon sharp stakes. Up, then! Lie here no longer! Let shame come into your heart, lest Patroclus become sport for the dogs of Troy to worry. Your shame, if the body goes from here with defilement upon it." Then in turn Achilles of the swift feet answered her. "Divine Iris, what god sent you to me with a message?" Then in turn swift-footed Iris spoke to him. "Hera sent me, the honored wife of Zeus, but the son of Cronos who sits on high does not know this, nor any other immortal of all those who dwell by the snows of Olympus." Then in answer to her spoke Achilles of the swift feet. "How shall I go into the fighting? They have my armor, and my beloved mother told me I must not be armored, not before with my own eyes I see her come back to me. She promised she would bring me magnificent arms from Hephaestus. Nor do I know of another whose glorious armor I could wear, unless it were the great shield of Telamonian Aias. But he himself wears it, I think, and goes in the foremost of the spear fight over the body of fallen Patroclus." Then in turn swift wind-footed Iris spoke to him. "Yes, we also know well how they hold your glorious armor. But go to the ditch, and show yourself as you are to the Trojans, if perhaps the Trojans might be frightened and give way from their attack, and the fighting sons of the Achaeans get wind again after hard work. There is little breathing space in the fighting." So speaking, Iris of the swift feet went away from him. But Achilles, the beloved of Zeus, rose up, and Athene swept about his powerful shoulders the fluttering aegis, and she, the divine among goddesses, about his head circled a golden cloud, and kindled from it a flame far shining. As when a flare goes up into the high air from a city from an island far away, with enemies fighting about it who all day long are in the hateful division of Ares, fighting from their own city. But as the sun goes down, signal fires blaze out one after another, so that the glare goes pulsing high for men of the neighboring islands to see it, in case they might come over in ships to beat off the enemy. So from the head of Achilles the blaze shot into the bright air. He went from the wall and stood by the ditch, nor mixed with the other Achaeans, since he followed the close command of his mother. There he stood and shouted, and from her Pallas Athene gave cry, and drove an endless terror upon the Trojans. As loud as comes the voice that is screamed out by a trumpet by murderous attackers who beleaguer a city, so then high and clear went up the voice of Achilles. But the Trojans, when they heard the brazen voice of Achilles, the heart was shaken in all, and the very floating-maned horses turned their chariots about, since their hearts saw the coming afflictions. The charioteers were dumbfounded as they saw the unwearied, dangerous fire that played above the head of great-hearted Pelion blazing, and kindled by the goddess grey-eyed Athene. Then 3 times across the ditch brilliant Achilles gave his great cry, and 3 times the Trojans and their renowned companions were routed. There at that time 12 of the best men among them perished upon their own chariots and spears. Meanwhile the Achaeans gladly pulled Patroclus out from under the missiles and set him upon a litter, and his own companions about him stood mourning, and along with them swift-footed Achilles went, letting fall warm tears as he saw his steadfast companion lying there on a carried litter and torn with the sharp bronze, the man he had sent off before with horses and chariot into the fighting, who never again came home to be welcomed. Now the Lady Hera of the ox-eyes drove the unwilling, wearless sun-god to sink in the depth of the ocean, and the sun went down, and the brilliant Achaeans gave over their strong fighting and the doubtful collision of battle. The Trojans on the other side moved from the strong encounter in their turn, and unyoked their running horses from under the chariots, and gathered into assembly before taking thought for their supper. They stood on their feet in assembly, nor did any man have the patience to sit down, but the terror was on them all, seeing that Achilles had appeared, after he had stayed so long from the difficult fighting. First to speak among them was the careful Polydamas, Pentheus' son, who alone of them looked before and behind him. He was companion to Hector, and born on the same night with him, but he was better in words, the other with the spear far better. He in kind intention toward all stood forth and addressed them. Now take careful thought, dear friends, for I myself urge you to go back into the city, and not wait for the divine dawn in the plain beside the ships. We are too far from the wall now. While this man was still angry with the great Agamemnon, for all that time the Achaeans were easier men to fight with. For I also used then to be one who was glad to be sleep out near their ships, and I hoped to capture the oar-swept vessels. But now I terribly dread the swift-footed son of Peleus. So violent is the valor in him, he will not be willing to stay here in the plain, where now Achaeans and Trojans from either side sunder between them the wrath of the war-god. With him the fight will be for the sake of our city and women. Let us go into the town. Believe me, thus it will happen. For this present immortal night has stopped the swift-footed son of Peleus, but if he catches us still in this place tomorrow, and drives upon us in arms, a man will be well aware of him, be glad to get back into sacred Ilion, the man who escapes. There will be many Trojans, the vultures and dogs will feed on. But let such a word be out of my hearing. If all of us will do as I say, though it hurts us to do it, this night we will hold our strength in the marketplace, and the great walls and the gateways, and the long smooth-planed, close-joined gate timbers that close to fit them shall defend our city. Then early in the morning, under dawn, we shall arm ourselves in the war gear, and take stations along the walls. The worse for him if he endeavors to come away from the ships and fight us here for our city. Back he must go to his ships again, when he wears out the strong necks of his horses, driving them at a gallop everywhere by the city. His valor will not give him leave to burst in upon us, nor sack our town. Sooner the circling dogs will feed on him. Then, looking darkly at him, Hector of the shining helm spoke. Polydamas, these things that you argue please me no longer, when you tell us to go back again and be cooped in our city. Have you not all had your glut of being fenced in our outworks? There was a time when mortal men would speak of the city of Priam as a place with much gold and much bronze. But now the lovely treasures that lay away in our houses have vanished, and many possessions have been sold and gone into Phrygia and into Maeonia the lovely, when great Zeus was angry. But now when the son of devious devising Cronos has given me the winning glory by the ships to pin the Achaeans on the sea, why, fool, no longer show these thoughts to our people. Not one of the Trojans will obey you. I shall not allow it. Come then, do as I say, and let us all be persuaded. Now take your supper by positions along the encampment, and do not forget your watch, and let every man be wakeful. And if any Trojan is strongly concerned about his possessions, let him gather them and give them to the people to use in common. It is better for one of us to enjoy them than for the Achaeans. In the morning, under the dawn, we shall arm ourselves in our war gear and awaken the bitter god of war by the hollow vessels. If it is true that brilliant Achilles has risen beside their ships, then the worse for him if he tries it, since I, for my part, will not run from him out of this sorrowful battle, but rather stand fast to see if he wins the great glory, or if I can win it. The war god is impartial. Before now he has killed the killer." So spoke Hector, and the Trojans thundered to hear him, fools since Pallas Athene had taken away the wits from them. They gave their applause to Hector in his counsel of evil, but none to Polydamas, who had spoken good sense before them. They took their supper along the encampment. Meanwhile the Achaeans mourned all night in lamentation over Patroclus. Peleus' son led the thronging chant of their lamentation, and laid his manslaughtering hands over the chest of his dear friend, with outbursts of incessant grief. As some great bearded lion, when some man, a deer hunter, has stolen his cubs away from him out of the close wood, the lion comes back too late and is anguished, and turns into many valleys, quartering after the man's trail on the chance of finding him, and taken with bitter anger. So he, groaning heavily, spoke out to the Myrmidons. "Ah me, it was an empty word I cast forth on that day when in his halls I tried to comfort the hero Monoitios. I told him I would bring back his son in glory to Opus with Ilion sacked, and bringing his share of war spoils allotted. But Zeus does not bring to accomplishment all thoughts in men's minds. Thus it is destiny for us both to stain the same soil here in Troy, since I shall never come home, and my father, Peleus the aged rider, will not welcome me in his great house, nor Thetis my mother, but in this place the earth will receive me. But seeing that it is I, Patroclus, who follow you underground, I will not bury you till I bring to this place the armor and the head of Hector, since he was your great-hearted murderer. Before your burning pyre I shall behead 12 glorious children of the Trojans for my anger over your slaying. Until then you shall lie where you are, in front of my curved ships, and beside you women of Troy and deep-girdled Dardanian women shall sorrow for you day and night and shed tears for you, those whom you and I worked hard to capture by force and the long spear in days when we were storming the rich cities of mortals." So speaking, brilliant Achilles gave orders to his companions to set a great cauldron across the fire, so that with all speed they could wash away the clotted blood from Patroclus. They set up over the blaze of the fire a bathwater cauldron, and poured water into it, and put logs underneath and kindled them. The fire worked on the swell of the cauldron, and the water heated. But when the water had come to a boil in the shining bronze, then they washed the body, and anointed it softly with olive oil, and stopped the gashes in his body with stored-up unguents, and laid him on a bed, and shrouded him in a thin sheet from head to foot, and covered that over with a white mantle. Then all night long, gathered about Achilles of the swift feet, the Myrmidons mourned for Patroclus and lamented over him. But Zeus spoke to Hera, who is his wife and his sister. "So you have acted, then, Lady Hera of the ox-eyes. You have roused up Achilles of the swift feet. It must be, then, that the flowing-haired Achaeans are born of your own generation." Then the goddess, the ox-eyed Lady Hera, answered him, "Majesty, son of Cronos, what sort of thing have you spoken? Everyone who is mortal will try to accomplish his purpose for another, though he be a man and knows not such wisdom as we do. As for me, then, who claim I am the highest of all the goddesses, both ways, since I am eldest born and am called your consort, yours and yours in turn are lord over all the immortals, how could I not weave sorrows for the men of Troy when I hate them?" Now as these two were saying things like this to each other, Thetis of the silver feet came to the house of Hephaestus, imperishable, starry, and shining among the immortals, built in bronze for himself by the god of the dragging footsteps. She found him sweating as he turned here and there to his bellows busily, since he was working on 20 tripods, which were to stand against the wall of his strong-founded dwelling. And he had set golden wheels underneath the base of each one, so that of their own motion they could wheel into the immortal gathering, and return to his house, a wonder to look at. These were so far finished, but the elaborate ear-handles were not yet on. He was forging these and beating the chains out. As he was at work on this in his craftsmanship and his cunning, meanwhile the goddess Thetis the silver-footed drew near him. Charis of the shining veil saw her as she came forward, she, the lovely goddess, the renowned strong-armed one had married. She came and caught her hand and called her by name and spoke to her. "Why is it, Thetis of the light robes, you have come to our house now? We honor you and love you, but you have not come much before this. Come in with me, so I may put entertainment before you." She spoke, and shining among divinities, led the way forward, and made Thetis sit down in a chair that was wrought elaborately and splendid with silver nails, and under it was a footstool. She called to Hephaestus, the renowned smith, and spoke a word to him. "Hephaestus, come this way. Here is Thetis, who has need of you." Hearing her, the renowned smith of the strong arms answered her, "Then there is a goddess we honor and respect in our house. She saved me when I suffered much at the time of my great fall through the will of my own brazen-faced mother, who wanted to hide me for being lame. Then my soul would have taken much suffering, had not Eurynome and Thetis caught me and held me, Eurynome, daughter of Ocean, whose stream bends back in a circle. With them I worked 9 years as a smith, and wrought many intricate things, pins that bend back, curved clasps, cups, necklaces, working there in the hollow of the cave, and the stream of ocean around us went on forever with its foam and its murmur. No other among the gods or other mortal men knew about us, except Eurynome and Thetis. They knew, since they saved me. Now she has come into our house, so I must by all means do everything to give recompense to lovely-haired Thetis for my life. Therefore set out before her fair entertainment, while I am putting away my bellows and all my instruments." He spoke and took the huge blower off the block of the anvil limping, and yet his shrunken legs moved lightly beneath him. He set the bellows away from the fire, and gathered and put away all the tools with which he worked in a silver strong-box. Then with a sponge he wiped clean his forehead and both hands, and his massive neck and hairy chest, and put on a tunic, and took up a heavy stick in his hand, and went to the doorway limping. And in support of their master moved his attendants. These are golden, and in appearance like living young women. There is intelligence in their hearts, and there is speech in them, and strength, and from the immortal gods they have learned how to do things. These stirred nimbly in support of their master, and moving near to where Thetis sat in her high shining chair, Hephaestus caught her by the hand and called her by name and spoke a word to her. "Why is it, Thetis of the light robes, you have come to our house now? We honor you and love you, but you have not come much before this. Speak forth what is in your mind. My heart is urgent to do it if I can, and if it is a thing that can be accomplished." Then in turn Thetis answered him, letting the tears fall. "Hephaestus, is there among all the goddesses on Olympus one who in her heart has endured so many grim sorrows as the griefs Zeus, son of Cronos, has given me beyond others? Of all the other sisters of the sea, he gave me to a mortal, to Peleus, Icos' son, and I had to endure mortal marriage, though against my will. And now he, broken by mournful old age, lies away in his halls. Yet I have other troubles. For since he has given me a son to bear and raise up, conspicuous among heroes, and he shot up like a young tree, I nurtured him like a tree grown in the pride of the orchard. I sent him away in the curved ships to the land of Iliad to fight with the Trojans, but I shall never again receive him won home again to his country and into the house of Peleus. Yet while I see him live, and he looks on the sunlight, he has sorrows, and though I go to him, I can do nothing to help him. And the girl the sons of the Achaeans chose out for his honor, powerful Agamemnon took her away again out of his hands. For her his heart has been wasting in sorrow, but meanwhile the Trojans pinned the Achaeans against their grounded ships, and would not let them win outside, and the elders of the Argives entreated my son and named the many glorious gifts they would give him. But at that time he refused himself to fight the death for them. Nevertheless, he put his own armor upon Patroclus and sent him into the fighting, and gave many men to go with him. All day they fought about the Scaean gates, and on that day they would have stormed the city, if only Phoebus Apollo had not killed the fighting son of Menoetios there in the first ranks, after he had wrought much damage and given the glory to Hector. Therefore now I come to your knees, so might you be willing to give me for my short-lived son a shield and a helmet and 2 beautiful greaves fitted with clasps for the ankles and a corselet. What he had was lost with his steadfast companion when the Trojans killed him. Now my son lies on the ground, heart sorrowing. Hearing her, the renowned smith of the strong arms answered her, "Do not fear, let not these things be a thought in your mind. And I wish that I could hide him away from death and its sorrow at that time when his hard fate comes upon him, as surely as there shall be fine armor for him, such as another man out of many men shall wonder at when he looks at it." So he spoke and left her there, and went to his bellows. He turned these towards the fire, and gave them their orders for working. And the bellows, all 20 of them, blew on the crucibles, from all directions, blasting forth wind to blow the flames high, now as he hurried to be at his place, now at another, wherever Hephaestus might wish them to blow, and the work went forward. He cast on the fire bronze which is weariless, and tin with it, and valuable gold and silver, and thereafter set forth upon its standard the great anvil, and gripped in one hand the ponderous hammer, while in the other he grasped the pincers. First of all he forged a shield that was huge and heavy, elaborating it about, and threw around it a shining triple rim that glittered, and the shield strap was cast of silver. There were 5 folds encompassing the shield itself, and upon it he elaborated many things in his skill and craftsmanship. He made the earth upon it, and the sky, and the sea's water, and the tireless sun, and the moon waxing into her fullness, and on it all the constellations that festoon the heavens, the Pleiades and the Hyades, and the strength of Orion, and the bear, whom men give also the name of the wagon, who turns about in a fixed place and looks at Orion, and she is never plunged in the wash of the ocean. On it he wrought in all their beauty 2 cities of mortal men, and there were marriages in one, and festivals. They were leading the brides along the city from their maiden chambers, under the flaring of torches, and loud bride song was arising. The young men followed the circles of the dance, and among them the flutes and lyres kept up their clamor, as in the meantime the women, standing each at the door of her court, admired them. The people were assembled in the marketplace, where a quarrel had arisen, and 2 men were disputing over the blood price for a man who had been killed. One man promised full restitution in a public statement, but the other refused and would accept nothing. Both then made for an arbitrator to have a decision, and people were speaking up on either side to help both men. But the heralds kept the people in hand, as meanwhile the elders were in session on benches of polished stone in the sacred circle, and held in their hands the staves of the heralds who lift their voices. The 2 men rushed before these, and took turns speaking their cases, and between them lay on the ground 2 talents of gold, to be given to that judge who in this case spoke the straightest opinion. But around the other city were lying 2 forces of armed men shining in their war gear. For one side counsel was divided whether to storm and sack, or share between both sides the property and all the possessions the lovely citadel held hard within it. But the city's people were not giving way, and armed for an ambush. Their beloved wives and their little children stood on the rampart to hold it, and with them the men with age upon them, but meanwhile the others went out, and Ares led them, and Pallas Athene. These were gold both, and golden remnant upon them, and they were beautiful and huge in their armor, being divinities, and conspicuous from afar, but the people around them were smaller. These, when they were come to the place that was set for their ambush, in a river, where there was a watering place for all animals, there they sat down in a place shrouding themselves in the bright bronze. But apart from these were sitting 2 men to watch for the rest of them, and waiting until they could see the sheep and the shambling cattle, who appeared presently, and 2 herdsmen went along with them, playing happily on pipes, and took no thought of their treachery. Those others saw them, and made a rush, and quickly thereafter cut off on both sides the herds of cattle and the beautiful flocks of shining sheep, and killed the shepherds upon them. But the other army, as soon as they heard the uproar arising from the cattle as they sat in their councils, suddenly mounted behind their light-foot horses, and went after, and soon overtook them. These stood their ground and fought a battle by the banks of the river, and they were making casts at each other with their spears bronze-headed. And hate was there, with confusion among them, and death the destructive. She was holding a live man with a new wound, and another one unhurt, and dragged a dead man by the feet through the carnage. The clothing upon her shoulders showed strong red with the men's blood. All closed together like living men, and fought with each other, and dragged away from each other the corpses of those who had fallen. He made upon it a soft field, the pride of the tilled land, wide and triple ploughed, with many ploughmen upon it, who wheeled their teams at the turn and drove them in either direction. And as these, making their turn, would reach the end strip of the field, a man would come up to them at this point and hand them a flagon of honey-sweet wine, and they would turn again to the furrows in their haste to come again to the end strip of the deep field. The earth darkened behind them and looked like earth that had been plowed, though it was gold. Such was the wonder of the shield's forging. He made on it the precinct of a king, where the laborers were reaping with the sharp reaping hooks in their hands. Of the cut swaths, some fell along the lines of reaping, some after another, while the sheath binders caught up others and tied them with bind ropes. There were 3 sheaf binders who stood by, and behind them were children picking up the cut swaths and filling their arms with them, and carried and gave them away always. And by them the king, in silence and holding his staff, stood near the line of the reapers happily. And apart and under a tree the heralds made a feast ready, and trimmed a great ox they had slaughtered. Meanwhile the women scattered, for the workmen to eat, abundant white barley. He made on it a great vineyard heavy with clusters, lovely and in gold, but the grapes upon it were darkened, and the vines themselves stood out through poles of silver. About them he made a field ditch of dark metal, and drove all around this a fence of tin, and there was only one path to the vineyard, and along it ran the grape bearers for the vineyard stripping. Young girls and young men, in all their light-hearted innocence, carried the kind, sweet fruit away in their woven baskets. And in their midst a youth with a single lyre played charmingly upon it for them, and sang the beautiful song for Linos in a light voice, and they followed him, with singing and whistling and light dance steps of their feet kept time to the music. He made upon it a herd of horn-straight oxen. The cattle were wrought of gold and of tin, and thronged in speed and with lowing out of the dung of the farmyard to a pasturing place by a sounding river, and beside the moving field of a reed bed. The herdsmen were of gold who went along with the cattle, 4 of them, and 9 dogs, shifting their feet, followed them. But among the foremost of the cattle 2 formidable lions had caught hold of a bellowing bull, and he with loud lowings was dragged away, as the dogs and the young men went in pursuit of him. But the 2 lions, breaking open the hide of the great ox, gulped the black blood and the inward guts, as meanwhile the herdsmen were in the act of setting and urging the quick dogs on them. But they, before they could get their teeth in, turned back from the lions, but would come and take their stand very close, and bayed and kept clear. And the renowned smith of the strong arms made on it a meadow large and in a lovely valley for the glimmering sheep flocks, with dwelling places upon it, and covered shelters and sheepfolds. And the renowned smith of the strong arms made elaborate on it a dancing floor, like that which once in the wide spaces of Knossos Daedalus built for Ariadne of the lovely tresses. And there were young men on it and young girls, sought for their beauty with gifts of oxen dancing, and holding hands at the wrist. These wore, the maidens, long light robes, but the men wore tunics of fine-spun work and shining softly, touched with olive oil. And the girls wore fair garlands on their heads, while the young men carried golden knives that hung from sword belts of silver. At whiles on their understanding feet they would run very lightly, as when a potter crouching makes trial of his wheel, holding it close in his hands to see if it will run smooth. At another time they would form rows and run, rows crossing each other. And around the lovely chorus of dancers stood a great multitude happily watching, while among the dancers 2 acrobats led the measures of song and dance revolving among them. He made on it the great strength of the ocean river, which ran around the uttermost rim of the shield's strong structure. Then, after he had wrought this shield, which was huge and heavy, he wrought for him a corselet brighter than fire in its shining, and wrought him a helmet, massive and fitting close to his temples, lovely in intricate work, and laid a gold top-ridge along it, and out of pliable tin wrought him leg armor. Thereafter, when the renowned smith of the strong arms had finished the armor, he lifted it and laid it before the mother of Achilles. And she, like a hawk, came sweeping down from the snows of Olympus, and carried with her the shining armor, the gift of Hephaestus.